John, welcome to the Like Arrows podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely, my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on because when God gave me the idea to have the podcast for Like Arrows, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have John on because I remember last year you were on the Pure Desire podcast talking about recovery for single and unmarried people. So I'm just super excited to have you on.
Yeah, super excited to be here. It's singleness and recovery seems to be the topic of my life, so let's go.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so starting off, can you explain a little bit about who you are and what you do at Pure Desire Ministries?
Yeah, would love to. Again, my name is John. I work here at Pure Desire Ministries as the Donor Development Manager, which is a really long title for a much simpler thing, as in I oversee donors and donations to the nonprofit. And yeah, currently living on the West Coast, so never would have thought I'd say that, but I've been in Portland, Oregon for the last 2 years, and within the last 2 months, a recent home buyer. So here we go.
Wow, that's awesome. That's so cool. We'll have to talk about that a little bit later.
Love to.
That's so cool. So can you kind of talk about how you found Pure Desire and the impact that the Seven Pillars group has had on you and just
Yeah,
your journey?
yeah, absolutely. So not originally from the West Coast. Originally grew up in South Dakota to
Mm.
two parents who loved Jesus relationally, not just religiously, which was an absolute gift. Grew up on a farm and ranch in South Dakota in what I would call the middle of nowhere. I didn't realize that it wasn't normal to take a monthly trip to Walmart that happened to be 80 miles away. I thought that's how everybody treated Walmart. But yeah, currently 25, the oldest of four brothers. The middle two are married and the youngest is 18. And just to give you some background before I jump into just how I got to know Pure Desire, was exposed to pornography at the age of 9 while actually doing a homework assignment with my mother, which just brought a lot of shame. I went back 30 minutes later to find this image that had appeared. And as I found it, she came up the stairs behind me to find me, and of course responded in anger and rage, if I'm being honest. And yet, if I'm being honoring, she wasn't prepared, equipped, or qualified, as in, what do you do when you find your 9-year-old looking at pornography? And so that was 9. At 13, I was given an iPod Touch, which promised freedom, but only led to slavery because I went back to Google and then to YouTube and clicking random links until I found hardcore pornography, in which all of a sudden I found myself living in this duplicit lifestyle of who am I? This question of identity. Because on the outside, I was this perfect Christian kid, the oldest son, and yet on the inside, caving so deeply to sin behind closed doors. And so it was in this time from 13 to 18 that I would go on to discover masturbation, probably masturbating myself to sleep nightly. I couldn't have said this then, but I can now regarding pain, running from pain, using it as a coping mechanism, and just this idea of pleasure of life is hard, but this feels good. And so 13 to 16 was what I would say is probably some of the depth of addiction. At 16, my mom was suspicious, so she gave me a book about sexuality. And it was in this book, Lauren, that the first part said, "Don't have sex." And I looked around thinking, I'm crushing it. I haven't touched a girl. I haven't kissed a girl. And then the second part of the book said, if you're caught in porn, you must tell somebody. And I've never closed the book faster my whole life.
Wow.
And there was an ounce of hope that night as a sophomore in high school. And I opened it back up and it said, tell a trusted adult, a father figure, or a youth pastor, all of which happened to be my dad in our
Oh,
small town. I'm like, I get it, God. You want me to tell my dad, but I don't. In fact, that's the last person I wanted to tell. And so I got really courageous and I wrote a prayer in the Devo of that day that simply said, God, give me the courage to tell my father that I watch pornography. And I would go on to pray that prayer for 2 weeks, taking 2 steps up the stairs to my parents' room with the hopes of telling them as they were going to bed, only to hear them praying out loud for me, my future spouse, and my siblings. And the
wow.
noose of addiction, again, I didn't have that language then, but I do now. The noose of addiction was never tighter, as shame said, if they knew who you really were, and guilt said, and if they'd known what you've really done. So here I am with one hand on this side of the rope and the other on this side of the rope, and this was strangling me. The enemy was taking away even my ability to speak to my parents who loved me. But that's not what I heard. And so 2 weeks later, my dad came into the basement as he was going outside to feed the cattle. I had my Bible and the book, and he's like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Get away." And he starts walking over, and my heart's just pounding through my chest. And he grabs this book and he opens it without flipping a page. He opens to the page in which I had written the prayer and
Mm.
silently reads it until he looks up at me and says, "You watch people having sex."
Mm.
And I just began weeping. And all I could say was, "Yes." And for the
Mm.
first time in 4 years, I began to speak the truth to the unreality that I had been living in, the hiding, the deception, the manipulation, the gaslighting, you name
Yeah.
it. That's what I had been doing. And he said, "You know this is a sin." I said, "Dad, I know, but I'm so stuck. I have no idea what to do." And he stood there for what felt like eternity until finally he said, "I'd love to help you." And
Mm.
I said, "I desperately need it." So from 16 to 18, we began reading Every Young Man's Battle, which has a lot of pros and also some cons. And I think one of the cons, Lauren, is the book has the title that would make it out to seem that only men struggle. And of course, you know that isn't true. And so I
Yeah.
think sometimes the shame level around men sharing about their struggle with pornography can be high. But I think the shame level for women struggling about their struggle with pornography is so much higher because for so long it's been a man's issue. But here at Pure Desire, we believe that it's not just a man or a woman's issue, it is a people problem because we've all been born with a sense, of course, a good gift of
Mm.
sexuality into a
Yeah.
disordered world where that gets shifted and marred. And so at 18, I went to a Christian camp. Nothing had really changed. I began lying to my dad again. And it was at this Christian camp where Sean McDowell spoke about porn. And I'm like, what? I didn't think Christians could say that word, let alone talk about that word. And it was in this place that he said 2 in 3 Christian men struggle with porn in the church. 1 in 3 Christian women struggle with porn in the church. And 1 in 4 internet searches are for porn.
Mm.
I put my pen down and said, that can't be true. That night, we went to a breakout room where it was testimony night. And I grew up in the
Mm.
church. I knew what testimony night was. It was how good God was, how kind of good I am, and why you, Lauren, should want the good life.
Mm.
And it was in this place that the leader shut the door and said, anything that's said in this room stays in this room. I'm like, what is this? Christian Vegas? Like, I didn't know rooms like this existed.
Mm.
And then he went on to share his story first.
Mm.
Christian home, porn, my jaw hit the floor. And then he
Mm.
went on to share that he had lost his virginity in college, and I began shaking like, this guy is jacked up. And it was in this moment that the Holy Spirit one-twoed my heart and said, "You're the jacked up one." And it's the jacked up version of you that I love, not
Mm.
this projected, not this masked up version of perfection and
Wow.
performance, but it is the broken, the unraveled version of you that I love. And if you don't get honest, that will be your story. And so
Mm.
all of a sudden my hand began to shakily raise. I'm like, "God, what's happening?" And he's like, "You're next." I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, I don't know what to say." And he's like, "Talk about porn." I'm like, "You just said that." And I just, like, I can say that. And so for the next 5 to 10 minutes, all I did was share my story about pornography as
Wow.
I shook and I wept because guilt and shame were leaving my body for the first time in 6 years. And then
Mm.
5 out of the 6 guys in the room that night, Lauren, in the year of 2016, all had the exact same story. Christian home, porn, struggling in silence. And I'm going, "God,
Wow.
if we're all dying in silence, why is nobody speaking?" Because the enemy took years of my life in perceived silence that wasn't even real. I think if
Mm.
God could have spoken over me in that night, he would have said, "That's why I created you." And I said,
Mm.
"Well, you've got the wrong guy. My resume says porn addict, liar, manipulator, and it just gets worse." And he said, "Perfect." Because what I couldn't see is that he was performing heart surgery, removing
Mm.
a heart of stone, implanting a heart made of flesh, like Ezekiel 36:26 talks about. The old was passing away, and behold, the new was coming. I'm Snapchatting these girls that I have been talking to inappropriately, saying, "I can't talk to you like this anymore. I'm so sorry for stripping you of your nobility. Would you forgive me?" And they're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like,
Wow.
"No, Jesus is changing my life. And I don't want to live the way in which I was. Like everything's beginning to be new because my
Mm.
life had been marked by the first half of John 10:10. The
Wow.
enemy had come to kill, steal, and destroy, and I had experienced that fully. And yet it was here at this camp that I began to believe that the back half could also be true, that Jesus came to give life and life to the full. And I'm saying,
Mm.
Jesus, if that's real, then I want all of it because I'm destroyed and I've been stolen from. But
Mm.
don't waste my life. Don't waste my pain. Don't waste my story. God, use me. And so I called my dad from camp
Mm.
and said, Dad, I want free. And he said, free from what? I said, free from porn. He said,
Wow.
John, so you've been lying to me for 3 years. I said, yeah. He said, what do I have to trust? I said, Dad, you don't have anything to trust, especially not my words, but
Mm.
trust in what I do when I get home because I will act upon what I believe. And he
Mm.
said, we'll see what you do when you get home. And he hung up.
Mm.
So I flew home to the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. Again, that's where I grew up. And before I even got home, Lauren, I went to a baseball game. And my coach of 2 years in front of my entire team on the bleachers said, Hey, Begeman, did they tell you to kill all the homosexuals at that camp? That's what all Christians want, right? And I'm like,
Wow.
what? I said, oh my God, I said, use me, but like homosexuality is not my thing. Like, God, what are you doing? And it was in
Mm.
this place that I said, hey, Andy, I think homosexuality is a sin nature. I struggle with porn. Should I
Mm.
be killed? And I'm
Mm.
like, Lauren, what did I just say in front of my whole team? And they're like, did Begeman, the Christian, just say porn? And then afterwards, two guys came up to me and they said, that's my story.
Wow.
Lauren, that was 7 years ago.
Mm.
And my story has continued to look a lot like that 7 years
Wow.
later. I got home that night, told my mom everything. It was this really awkward moment of confession. Mom, I was 13 and I began having lustful thoughts. And she's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm like, Mom, I need you to know my story. Because
Mm.
if you know my story, then maybe it won't be my three younger brothers' stories. If you
Mm.
know my story, then maybe we can chart a different story for their lives. And so I got to college after calling just about every single guy in my contacts saying, I know you think I'm a perfect Christian, but really I'm a porn addict and Jesus came to save me and he can do the same for you. I got to college, pursued purity groups, led purity groups, all the while studying communication and broadcast, wanting to be a TV news anchor. And God's like, come back. No, 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 no. I'm like, no, God, let me be a TV news anchor. And he's like, John, you know I've called you. And I
Mm.
wept in a basement for about an hour right before I was about to graduate as God was stripping me of the American dream, finding myself much like the rich young ruler who'd come to Jesus
Mm.
and said, Jesus, I'm willing to follow you. And Jesus says, go sell everything. And I'm like, but not that, I don't want to do that. And it was in this place that Jesus said, I don't want your compromise. I just want you. And I had
Mm.
the opportunity to be a year-long intern with Campus Crusade for Christ, now known as
Mm.
Cru, but specifically with Josh McDowell. I
Mm.
wanted to travel with this evangelist, but it was in the
Yeah.
interview process. That was a long way to say how I came to hear about Pure Desire. It was in the interview process that we had 3 hours of conversation around sexual immorality. And I'm
Wow.
like, I'm the guy. I'm wearing the Porn Kills Love shirt. I'm leading purity groups. And then they basically said, no, you're the broken guy. I said, no, no, no. I said, I'm trying to change the
Mm.
world. And they said, yeah, but what if God wants to change you,
Wow.
me? No, 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 no. The world's broken. No, you didn't hear us, John. We think you're broken. And so
Mm.
instead of living in California and literally flying to different cities every other weekend, I got shipped to Dallas, Texas to sit in a office in Plano, Texas, not too far from where y'all are at.
Yeah.
And it was here that I began to go through Pure Desire. They said, hey,
Mm.
we think you need a Pure Desire 7 Pillars counseling group. It's the only way we'll hire you. And again, I'm like, counseling? Like, that's a swear word where I grew up. Only broken people pursue counseling. And they said, no, no, we think it could be the greatest gift God could give you, that his kindness and his mercy would impact you first. Because if it
Mm.
doesn't start within our own hearts, how will it ever start within our family, within our
Yeah.
community, within our county, within our state, and maybe the country, and maybe a couple other nations, and maybe the world? It's got to start here first. We can't sell with that which we haven't received. And so God began to say, no, 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 no. Instead of you changing the world, I'm just trying to change you. And so that was 2020 when they said, you need Pure Desire. And I'm like, who the heck is this group of people from Oregon and why do I need them? So
Wow. Oh my gosh. Whew, you said a lot. Thank you so much for sharing. I was just taking notes as you were like just kind of sharing your story. Um, I could so relate to the shame aspect of it, of hiding it and like your dad saying that, you lied to him for like so many years. But something that you said that I wrote down, you mentioned the noose of an addiction. And I think that language is appropriate because especially a lot of people in the church just see pornography or masturbation as a lust problem. So I have so many thoughts, but that's actually one of my first questions is it a sin? Is porn or masturbation a sin? How do you know you're addicted to it? But then also, why is it not just a lust problem?
Yeah, such a great question. I'll start with porn, move to masturbation, and then end with the lust problem.
Okay.
Porn, I think, is probably very clear regarding the idea of sexual immorality or worshiping this idea of an image of God rather than God himself, which as we're viewing nudity on a screen, whether that's a photo or a video, here we are finding ourselves worshiping creation rather than the creator. I think oftentimes, maybe moving more towards this idea or language of addiction, Nick, our executive director here at Pure Desire, was once asked by a mentor, "Hey, how long have you struggled?" And Nick went on to say maybe along the lines of 10 to 20 years. And how many times have you tried to stop? And he said, well, every time was the last time. I'm sure we can all probably relate to some of that language of, God, this is the last time. I'll never do it again. And then he went on to say, and how many people has it hurt? How many people has your behaviors impacted? And Nick said, well, for sure my wife. And of course, Lauren, you and I aren't married, but I could say for sure my family and my parents and my siblings and my friends as I'm isolating and pulling away from them. And Nick's mentor calmly looked back at him and said, you just described clinical addiction.
Wow.
And it was this whoa moment for Nick. And so addiction is oftentimes giving up everything for one thing. And life can be giving up one thing to then get everything. And so, yeah, that's probably a helpful idea just around addiction. Maybe 3 questions of how long have you struggled? How many times have you tried to stop? And who has it impacted in your life? Of course, yourself, but also others. And then towards masturbation, if there is a key takeaway from our time together, Lauren, I really hope this is part of it. Because I think masturbation is almost this, if you've ever thought of like a river, of course, there's this water table underneath, there's this aquifer. So I think sometimes it's really easy to see the damaged, eroded, polluted river of pornography and maybe premarital sex and the other ways in which sexuality can be distorted. But I think the one that's hidden, the water table, the aquifer underneath, can sometimes be the topic of masturbation. Because if porn's shameful to talk about, then masturbation's even got another level of like, whoa. And, well, I can do it without lust. I feel like there's a lot of single people trying to make that argument, like, well, I wasn't lusting, or I can do it without lust. And if that's true, I'm going to say, hey, kudos to you. But the question that I love that Jonathan Pokluda has proposed on his Becoming Something podcast is simply, can you do it to the glory of God? That is the question. Can you masturbate to the glory of God? So I'll just leave that there for anybody listening. Can you masturbate to the glory of God? And I won't define that for you, but I'll leave it like that. But I will say, personally, when I think about masturbation, lust removed, I often think about this idea of a self-seeking or self-centered or selfish act. And it's really hard for me to imagine Adam or Jesus. Why do I pull these 2 people? Because Adam was living in this perfect Edenic-like world before the fall. And of course, Jesus being fully God and fully man are 2 representations of men living within this state of perfectness. It's really hard for me to imagine them isolating from others to pursue the act of masturbation. So I think the idea of selfishness and isolation are pretty clear indicators to me that this probably isn't the way of Jesus. So that's just lust aside. Is it selfish? And does it move you towards community and right relationship with God and others? Because I think we were designed for relationship. And I don't see a whole lot of that happening within the act of masturbation, which again, maybe is just a unique left turn, but just something for you to think about. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. I liked how you talk about the aquifer in the river and how masturbation is like a topic that nobody, like I would probably never hear it in church. And so thank you so much for giving that analogy and kind of going into detail about that. You said something earlier that I wanted to touch on. So I think this was back when you were talking about when you were in that meeting or at the, was it your church camp or some camp?
Right, a camp in Colorado, Summit
Yeah.
Ministries.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And you said like after that you had this like huge epiphany and you said the Holy Spirit convicted you and said, "You're the jacked up guy. You're the person that needs help." And I remember you said after that you texted all like these girls that you were kind of talking to on Snapchat, and you said something really I've never heard it in these words before. You said, "I'm sorry that I've been stripping you of your nobility." Can you kind of touch on that? Because one of my next questions was, what were the subliminal messages that pornography taught you, and how you're kind of challenging those narratives?
Absolutely. Maybe to start with the Imago Dei, Lauren, you and I bear the image of God. I think
Mm,
sometimes growing up in the church, we can hear the Genesis 3 version of the gospel, which is fall, devastated, separate, apart from God, separated by the chasm, which I'm not here to deny. That's a part of it. But sometimes we can miss the Genesis 1 version of you and I, male and female, created in his image. And instead of good, like the rest of creation, he looks at us and says, very good.
mm,
And even now, post fall, I think you and I are made in the image of God, very good. This identity, and yes, distorted, broken, born into sin, born into this broken world, but first and foremost, very good. Like that's how God sees us. We are made in his image. And again, all the way back even to this idea of why is pornography a sin? This idea of worshiping the image of instead of the actuality of God. And so I think for me, something that's been, I think something that was really destructive in my pursuit of pornography. Of course, the word objectification is maybe really common, but I remember even just thinking in my younger years as I began watching pornography, my brain was so quick to sexualize or to objectify almost any people group I was with, of just
mm,
this insatiable desire to like, is this sexual content? Because the world in which I'm living in behind closed doors is any situation, any context, any people, any person. I mean, category after category, scene after scene is all sexual. And
yeah.
so to remove yourself or to maybe live in two different worlds, I mean, they began to get really gray. And so classmates or friends or, peers that I'm doing life with all of a sudden are becoming potential, not actual, but potential sexual objects. And again, even the subliminal messages within pornography is about male pleasure and female pain, male dominance and female submissiveness. There's not often that females are the ones within the pornography that are being loved or cared for well. And so I think some of the messages I took away were that women specifically were objects for my pleasure, which
Mm,
sounds horrible to say out loud. But in the act of consuming and in the pursuit of addiction, these were the subliminal messages that were being projected to me. And so all of a sudden, I like to say that Snapchat can become porn 2.0 because porn in
really?
this slippery slope or this progression of sin never really stays porn. And the amount of
Mm,
stories that I get to hear from men 50 to 70 years old who have walked a journey much longer than I in the pursuit of addiction would very highly attest that pornography never stays pornography. So if you're listening and you're considering this idea that, well, it's just porn, it doesn't hurt anybody. The reality is Satan does not just want part of you. He
mm,
wants all of you. And again, that quote where sin takes you, to places you swore you'd never go and keeps you longer than you wanted to stay and costs you more than you wanted to pay. Those are really true statements. Like, please hear me when I say this. So for me, that progression began to shift to Snapchat. As
mm,
honestly, for me, there was this moral line in my mind of, well, I'm not going to send a nude or receive a nude, but we can talk about sex. And so it just
mm,
became more of this sexting, like verbally, more than it was even through photos. But of course,
mm,
for so many kids, and Lauren, getting to work here at Pure Desire, even within the last 3 months, or maybe 4 months now, getting to talk with two different 18-year-olds regarding being sexually exploited via Snapchat. Bots
wow.
coming after people, sending nude photos, which I think is so unfair because all of a sudden your prefrontal cortex is shut down and it's quite literally sending these guys into their limbic system, which is the fight, flight, or freeze. I'm not trying to make an excuse, but that's quite literally what's happening biologically. and then
Mm.
tricked into sending photos of themselves and then being extorted for money. I I'm not a
Oh
parent,
my
but
gosh.
it's really hard for me to think that I would ever allow uh, that future child to have Snapchat after just seeing the evils of it and experiencing that for myself. So, yeah, Snapchat
Wow.
was one of the first things that had to go in my pursuit of recovery.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for touching on that, especially when we're talking about technology and the access that so many young people have now. It's crazy, and I personally think it's not just on Snapchat too, like you were talking about. It's everywhere. It's on any app, especially a lot of newer apps that are coming out too. So I think for parents, it's so important for them to understand what are the capabilities of each
Yeah.
platform. And I don't know if there's like specific like safety locks that or like child parental privileges that a parent could implement on their child's device. But wow, that's so important. And kind of going back to, you talked about the noose of addiction.
Mm,
In the book Pure Desire by Dr. Ted Roberts, he talks
yeah.
about that, and he says that one of the parts of the noose, I think he said it's made up of like, is it 3 or 4 parts,
Yeah.
and one of those parts is your origin story, your
Yeah.
family of origin.
Yeah.
And in the book Unwanted by Jay Stringer, I have it here on my desk.
Come
Um,
on.
yeah, he said Dr. Patrick Carnes, one of the leading researchers on sexual compulsivity, found 77% of those who struggle with sexual addiction report coming from a rigid family, and then 87% report coming from a disengaged family.
Mm,
So, how did you kind of see this playing out in your family?
yeah.
Because I think one of the unfortunate things is, like I kind of mentioned before, a lot of people just see this as a lust issue, and
Mm,
they don't understand how maybe some of their early childhood experiences,
yeah.
their the ways that they were brought up in their family, how it's impacting their present decisions and behaviors today.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah, and language we use here often at Pure Desire is it's not just a lust problem, it's not just a moral problem, it's a brain problem. God has given us such beauty and such power within our brains. And of course, the enemy would move towards this good thing to distort, to hijack, to misinterpret. And so, for so many people, I think they've grown up with this idea of try harder, pray more, confess more, just being an accountability group, purity group. And I think accountability and purity, if I'm being honest, Lauren, I think those words are really going to fall away
Mm,
because they've been words with good intentions and really great hopes, but not really great outcomes. And so I think the words like wholeness and the words like integrity will continue to persist, I think, through probably Gen Z. And
mm,
I think authentic, even the word authentic was this kind of buzzword for a while, but I think even truer words like honest and open and transparent will continue to push through Gen Z rather than authentic. So that's just maybe to start there and say it's not just a moral problem. It's not just a lust problem. You're not just some sexual a person with some crazy sexual drive. You also have a brain problem.
yeah.
And at the same time, like Romans 12, 1 through 2 speaks very clearly to this, that we can renew our minds, we can transform them. I love Psalm 23 where it says, God, you restore my soul, restore my mind, my body, my person. And so praise God for the power and neuroplasticity that our brains can change. We don't have to
Yeah.
stay stuck in the ruts that we found ourselves in, but at the same time, it's going to take work and it's going to take effort. And it
Yeah.
might be a 2 to 5 year process like Dr. Ted mentions in the book,
Mm,
which again just simply goes back to neurological studies. And I think there are some people, they say one of the biggest realizations they have within going through a Pure Desire group is that science and the Bible, or science and Scripture, are speaking to the same thing.
yeah.
This is something I learned while working with Josh McDowell, that truth is anything that coincides with reality, and God created reality. So if it is true, it is speaking to God, even if it's not explicitly stated within Scripture. It's saying the same thing, which I think is a really
Yeah.
powerful thing. And then last, just to talk maybe about the noose of sexual addiction,
Yeah.
4 components, which we don't have to dive into. That's maybe more of the 201 course. But something I just want to say really simply is oftentimes Ted will say, on the one hand, Again, imagining the rope with the noose around your neck, and you're pulling it. And on one hand is this commitment to Christ, knowing very well what a sexual Christian ethic should be. And on the other hand, you find yourself doing these destructive behaviors, sexually behind closed doors, whether that's masturbation, pornography, paying for sex in whatever capacity. And as you pull on the one hand, as you push into your faith, as you push into community, as you push into following Jesus, apprenticing behind him, and all of a sudden here you're doing these things behind closed doors, you yourself are literally strangling yourself because the
Mm.
shame and the guilt are rising. And so I love that Pure Desire for so many people, of course, through the power of Jesus, is the way in which they come to be able to take the noose off. And it's interesting because not only does a noose suffocate you regarding oxygen, but in this analogy, at least in my brain, it takes your voice.
Wow.
You can't speak.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who enter a Pure Desire group, this is a place for you to be honest and for your voice to be heard. Pain and all, woundedness and all. And like you said, Lauren, for so many people, there's a lot of pain that we're running from, that we're choosing to medicate with sexuality because it's one of the greatest forms regarding orgasm and dopamine within the brain of stress relief. And
Mm.
we live in an anxious and a lonely generation. So why wouldn't pornography and sexuality be something that we turn to? Not to shame it, to say, no, that makes sense. But there's a better
Yeah.
way. There's
Yeah.
a higher way. There is more life. So
Yeah. Wow. That is so good. And thank you for breaking down the different parts of the noose as well and kind of giving that analogy. Because when I remember when I first read that a little over a year ago and just seeing Dr. Ted talk about it in the book, I was like, wow. And it's so crazy. And it's so crazy how it's plaguing the church too. I think there's that stat in the book, or maybe I saw it online, that 60 to 70% of men in the church struggle with pornography. And then it's around 30 to, I think it's 25 to 30-ish% of women as well. And it's just wow. And so I just appreciate everything that you're doing at Pure Desire and all that you guys are doing to make sure that these groups are available in every church across the world. Because, like you said, so many people they're stuck in isolation because they believe the lie that I can never tell anyone, that no one can know. Just like the same thing you said that, like with your dad, like you did not want to tell him nor your parents, like nothing. So, and that kind of leads me into my next question or topic, I should say, around wholeness and as a single person who is
mhm.
also going through recovery. And thank you again for touching on just some of the subliminal messages that you learned through pornography. I think one of the subliminal messages that I have struggled with um, is thinking that or believing the lie that if I don't look a certain way,
Mhm.
if my body doesn't look a certain way, or if I'm not attractive enough as X, Y, or Z, then I'm not valuable. And so that is one of the biggest lies that I think pornography has had an effect on me, but also like so many women, maybe who don't even watch pornography, maybe who are not even addicted to it, but their husbands convince them to watch it, or their boyfriends
Mhm.
convince them to watch it with them or without. So, that's kind of segueing into my next question is how can a single person have a healthy sexuality without having sex?
Yeah, it's so good. I think sometimes, Lauren, we confuse sexuality and intimacy,
Mm.
thinking that they're one and the same. But the reality is that you can have sex without intimacy, and you can have intimacy without sex. A really simple way to break down this idea of intimacy is to segment it out and to sound it out like into me see. And the reality is, Lauren, for you and I as single people, we can have friends that into me see without having sex. Sex is not a pre-qualifier for intimacy. Sex and intimacy can be one and the same, but they're not always one and the same. And so I think for me, it's this idea of how do I push into relationship? You and I were built for relationship. We worship and serve a relational God, three in one, this trinity that is giving and receiving of love to and one another. And I think so being made in his image, we were made in the with the means and the desire for relationship. And that does not just mean marriage. And I think there are ways in which our singleness is pointing to a beautiful revelation that's to come. First and foremost, that we're committed to Christ, and that Christ is sufficient. We're not
Mm.
giving of ourselves to one another. And then the second simply being that as single people, we are living into the resurrected state where we'll neither be given in marriage to one another and we won't be having kids. And so I think there's some really unique
Mm.
ways in which our singleness is representative of the good news of the kingdom that is here and is coming. And so I don't want to miss that. I think for some single people, yourself and I included, who are in the church, I think the church, of course, at times, anything can become an idol. Any good thing can become an idol, and marriage, of course, can be idolized. But I've got an idea regarding why.
Mm.
I think we live I think continually we are living in the most sexualized age ever, with access, whether that's to pornography, but also just this moral fallout
Mm.
within our cultural moment. And amidst this sexualized age, I think the church has found an answer, and the answer is to just get married. Oh,
Mm.
you're struggling with porn, so just get married.
Mm.
Oh, you can't keep your hands off of your girlfriend or your boyfriend, well, just get married. Oh, you keep having sex outside of marriage and you're living together, just get married. As if
Mm.
marriage is this band-aid, or marriage is the salve, or marriage is the healing. And the reality is, marriage is not your healer. Jesus is. And Lauren, you and I can pursue Jesus in or outside of marriage. And so let's do it right now, because there is a generation who is given something post 2007, this inflection point in history. When historians look back, they'll look to 2007 and say something radically shifted. Welcome in the iPhone and the iPod Touch. We're now handed something that was relatively mobile in rooms and put in our pockets. And Proverbs talks about how we can't carry fire next to our chest and not be burned. But Lauren, you and I and others have strapped it to our thighs, and we are consumed.
Yeah.
We're consumed. And a part of that is this idea of broken sexuality. Currently, I'm in a young adult group on Thursday night, literally tonight. And just the other week, we were talking about confession. And of course, like getting to work
Mm.
for Pure Desire, my story of pornography is pretty open and known. But as these guys went around, so many of them were talking about sexual addiction, using that language. I'm like, we're within the church. And they're all talking, I shouldn't say all, many of them are talking about sexual addiction, some even pursuing SA or Sexaholics Anonymous. I'm like,
Wow.
this is crazy. But again, it makes sense. It's just like
Yeah.
if the church isn't going to offer it, they're going to go look for help somewhere else.
Right.
So how do we be a part of the solution? And the solution isn't necessarily marriage, because I think there's two great lies in sexual brokenness or addiction. The first one being you're alone. And Lauren and I are here to tell you, you are not alone. You are one
Right.
of millions, if not billions, of people who are struggling. Because again, we live in a broken world. Nobody escapes without some sort of broken sexuality. And then the second lie is this: marriage will solve you.
Mm.
So just get married. It'll all go away when you get married. But pure desire would not exist if that was true.
Yeah.
Because I would say the most common phone call we get is from the wife, a year in, 10 years in, 20 years in, who says, I don't know who I woke up to this morning,
Mm.
because I just found out about a 10 or 20-year addiction that he's been hiding. I need help. And if something doesn't change, I'm leaving, because sexual immorality is grounds for divorce biblically.
Yeah.
And they have every right to walk away from someone who's been hurting them, lying, and deceiving them for years. And so please do not believe the lie that marriage will solve you, because it won't. In fact, it'll just expose more of what it finds. And so
Mm.
do the hard work right now. I believe that as we step into recovery in the lane of singleness, that we can bless future spouses and future generations, that the storylines are shifting, that generational sin or curses can stop with us. We can own it. We can say no more, and we can pass on blessing instead of curse. So let's do it. Let's pursue health as a single.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, that was all so good. I want to like take everything you said and like break it up bit by bit. One, and it was something that I wasn't even going to, I was going to bring up, but you said it so, like in such a concise way that marriage won't solve your problem. Marriage won't solve your porn problem. And it was so crazy because I'm also in an unraveled group with Pure Desire. And if you want to check out Pure Desire, go to the website. I have all the links, everything about it there on our website at likearrows.net. But I think I think the church they push for marriage because it represents like our own individual relationships with Jesus. That's like the only picture that shows like God's glory on earth, and it's so beautiful. But I think sometimes a lot of things can be taken out of context. And I also think it can be pushed onto single people as like, you are not complete until you're married. And so I really liked how you touched on that. Marriage, it won't solve your problems with pornography, fantasy, unwanted sexual behaviors, but if anything, it will expose them. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely had feelings of like, oh my gosh, like my life has not started or begun because I'm not married. It's so crazy. I have felt that so many times, like just when I'm alone, or whether I'm at like a family gathering and someone, you know, brought their boyfriend or brought their girlfriend, and people are kind of looking at me like, oh, you're the oldest one, because I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. So shout out to the older siblings.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, there's all of these expectations and this tension. And then when you add on the layer of you struggle with unwanted sexual behavior, pornography, it can almost feel like double shame. So
Yeah.
how do you kind of deal with the tension and expectations of being single and then desiring marriage?
It's a profound question. And first, I just want to say I'm entering this question from a place of woundedness, as in struggle, as in I have not found the perfect silver lining, and I am not elevated or somehow above anybody. I am in this boat. But I will say this, I think something that's been really helpful for me, I think it'd be funny to do like a single stereotype of, this type of single or this type of single. Two that I'm thinking of very clearly. There's the single who's always in and out of a relationship or always pursuing the next boyfriend or girlfriend. And then I think there's sometimes the single who's like, well, or he or she, I've never really dated, and like I'm just waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting some more. And I've definitely found myself more in the I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting some more with the lens of patience. Man, I want to be
Mm,
patient first and foremost. I want
yeah.
to lengthen my patience, God, instead of letting me lower my standards. Like that's been a phrase I've come back to often.
Woo, that is so good.
But at the same time, I think sometimes my patience can mask insecurity. My patience can mask fear. And so even within the last year, just to like zoom into my current narrative, the limbic story that I've been telling is at the end of 2022, I realized I hadn't gone on any dates. And it felt like God kind of slid that note underneath the door, like, hey, man. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. And he kind of slid it back and said, no, we should probably talk about it. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. And I just saw myself in this room kind of barricaded by a bunch of drawers and desks. And it was a dark room, and the door was beginning to slowly open, and just sensing that Jesus was coming in. And it reminded in the book of Revelations that Jesus, the story of Jesus knocking. Now, I think oftentimes it's preached that just let him into your heart and your life, and it's like the lens of salvation. But the reality is he's knocking on the door of the church of Laodicea.
Mm,
Christians, he's not knocking on the door of an unbeliever. He's knocking on the door of a believer, saying, I want that room too.
mm,
You've been keeping this from me, and maybe not keeping it from me, but I can help there too. He's not coming in to cut things up. This is one of the quotes in the 7 pillars, that he doesn't come in with a flashlight and a scalpel, but a flashlight and a smile,
mm,
saying, I can take care of that.
yeah.
Like, I'm bigger than that. Like, hey, this is no problem to me. Porn, no problem to me. Masturbation, and not to make light of sin, but to make light of his power and his strength to eradicate, to redeem, to bring restoration. Not just recovery, but restoration. Anything can recover. I think we can recover anything, but restoration, that's work that only God can do. Only God can take something that's broken and make it better. To take something old and make it brand new, that's the work of restoration. And God saying, I want to restore this. And
Mm,
so even just this year, beginning to go on a couple dates and like, I don't know what I'm doing, anxiety, all those things that are flooding my body, but God beginning
yeah.
to rewrite pain. There have been
Mm,
some painful dating experiences, and God rewriting pain. Hey, she's not going to respond to you like that when you say you're not going to pursue her further.
mm,
Not going to do that. You don't have to overshare. And so there's been a lot of growth even within this year for me personally,
yeah.
as I've pursued dating again. But just to say this, I think the pursuit of health as a single, especially in recovery, is really tied up in one word: celibacy, which is a word that
Mm,
sounds creepy and old and weird, and I don't really know what that means besides the fact that I know that I'm not having sex. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like,
right.
yes, we've been given good sexual desires from God, and one day, hopefully, those will get to play out. But I think right now, for me, sometimes I love what Jay Stringer had to say in Unwanted regarding sensuality, which in the world's view can be maybe a negative word, but I think in the definition is this experience of our senses. So whether that's making a slow cooked meal, or like enjoying the smell of a candle, or taking long walks and being present where you are, there are many ways to experience the world in and around us, and you don't have to experience it in and through the lens of sex. Though, of course, that's a good lens. I'm not here to speak poorly of it, but the reality is that I'm not experiencing it currently, and that's okay. And I can
Yeah.
hold on to hope for what's to come, but not making it a God thing, not making it an idol, and saying, God, don't let me live waiting. I love this quote from Pete Scazzaro from his Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. He says, don't live waiting. Live the most fulfilled, joyful life you can right now. Because
Mm,
God's not waiting for me to get married. And I think I had that lie for a really long time. I'll
mm,
be a leader when, I can be a man if, I can be, all these different things. Just like, no, no, no. Like, I'm made in his image. He's called me to certain things, and he's gifted me in certain ways, and I have the opportunity to steward those right here and right now. Do not live waiting. Like, live fulfilled, pursue joy, because he's with you and you've got all you need. Again, Jesus is sufficient. And is marriage a good gift? Absolutely. And am I excited for that to come? Absolutely. But can I be patient? Maybe. Can I learn to
yeah.
trust? Hopefully. And so that's kind of where I'm at.
Wow. Thank you so much for you touched on you said you said you asked the Lord to lengthen your patience and not lower your standards. That's like a mic drop, like so good. Can you kind of go a little bit deeper into that too? Because I feel like our culture in a way promotes that because it's like, and I've heard this even kind of in and outside of the church. Oh, every guy struggles with that. You're just gonna
Yeah.
have to put up with it. You're just gonna have to accept that. And accept all these different things that are not true and it's not biblical. And even kind of going back to what you said earlier about marriage not solving your problem, I feel like a lot of people use that scripture in First Corinthians 7 when it talks about how it's better to get married than to mouthing it. It's better to get married than to burn with passion. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and yes, like Paul wrote that. That's a scripture in the Bible, but I feel like it's taken so out of context because, like you talked about, like you don't know like how like the generational sin and the mess and the brokenness that is not transformed. If it's not transformed, then it's going to be transferred to your
Come on.
kids.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of people kind of don't recognize that, so then they just get in a relationship, they settle, do whatever, and they don't recognize the damage that's been done until after years later the marriage, just like you're talking about how you guys get that phone call at Pure Desire. So can you kind of go into that a little bit? How in what ways has God lengthened your patience
Yeah, that's a
so
good
that you
question.
don't lower your standards?
Yeah, I'll start here. I I'm grieving expectation. And I think we can name that. My parents were married at 22 and 23, and that was the template I was given. That is not the template I'm living in, and I've had to grieve that. I remember
Same.
an aunt and uncle while I was living in Dallas, right out of college. They were visiting, and it was an incredible time. And they just simply asked me, John, where did you think you'd be when you were 22? Beautiful question, like very generative. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was married. I thought I'd be married because my parents were. And so the reality of now being in my mid 20s, being 25, there has been some weight and some grief. Again, just I think the grief cycle is important. This idea of breaking denial, like the reality is I'm single and 25, experiencing maybe some anger, like God, what the heck? Like God, what the heck are you doing? Like this is not what I intended. This is not what I wanted. Like God, like I want a different story, which is bargaining. That's the next stage of grief, which then moves into this lens of depression. And it was literally just the other day, and then finally acceptance. And I didn't plan to do this, but I wrote a poem literally just the other day. And I think grief and poetry for me sometimes can go hand in hand. And so I just want to zoom in. This is my lived experience within the last 3 weeks. If you don't mind, you mind if I share?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I said it out loud tonight. I didn't know if that would ever happen. I show up to all the church events because I'm afraid if I don't, I'll miss her. And I'm scared of being alone. I'm scared I'll never find home. I'm scared I'll go back to Google Chrome because it's a whole lot easier to run away from reality than to walk up and ask for her name. To run the risk of feeling any pain just to end up wounded, believing things will never change. It's crazy how trauma can rewrite narratives. What feels like love doesn't always end in marriages. I was supposed to meet her at college, but she wasn't there. God, I was supposed to meet her at camp, but she wasn't there. God, I was supposed to meet her as an intern, but she wasn't there. I've held on to that hope around every single corner, but 3 cities later, I'm beginning to despair. Year after year, God, do you even care? Siblings getting married, how is this even fair? Wedding after wedding, tear and after tear, heart in pieces, Holy Spirit be near. Bring comfort quickly and cast out the fear, because I'm desperate for your presence. Here now, here. Here now, here. I said it out loud tonight. I didn't think that would ever happen. And so there is a very real reality
Yeah.
to the patience and the lengthening and the standards. And at times, I think I've lived in the tension of we live in a culture that just says body on body, sex is just sex, it doesn't matter, pleasure is pleasure, this hookup culture. But the pendulum sometimes can swing in the church that says date with intentionality. If you don't know you're going to marry her on the first date, what are you doing? Like don't call it coffee, call it a date. You know what this is. And both of those things I think are unhealthy.
Mm.
Not that intentionality is bad and not that marriage is bad, but there is so much pressure or no pressure. Pressure, no pressure. And the reality is, I'm like, man, that feels like paralysis. And if there are singles out there living with any experience that I've lived with, I think there's a lot of paralysis of what do I do? How do I get to know people? And so
Yeah.
I think when it comes to patience, my hope is really this. And it comes back to this, it feels cheesy because I've heard it too many times, but this idea of like, I truly do want to run my race, as in I want to do
Mm.
life with God and I want to find her along the way. And
Yeah.
at least where I'm at currently, it doesn't look like using dating apps. It doesn't look like dating outside of my city because I want to be present where I am. I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to be pulled away. It's also in the New Testament that Paul says it would be better to be single. I'm like, Paul? Like, what? Like, are you serious right now? But the reality
Yeah.
is the single man or woman lives with so much less distraction. So I'm saying, God, you know what? You've got my undivided attention
Mm.
and I want to be fully yours, fully surrendered, fully dependent, fully weak, fully saying, hey, if weakness is an advantage, then being surrendered to the Holy Spirit is the goal. Like, I'm trying to be surrendered, and I'm going to use my weakness as an advantage. And whether that's, and I'm not saying singleness is weakness, I'm saying my pain and my wounds,
Yeah.
and living in my life stage, not living waiting for what's to come or wishing in the past, but saying, today, with my feet on the ground, I'm here in 2023, and God, you have yet to meet me anywhere other than my feet have been. So, God, would you meet me today? Would you show up today? I need your grace. So,
Wow. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that poem. That is so awesome. And I think the cool thing is in just hearing the emotion and the longing and the waiting, it's like you're channeling that in a healthy way through writing poetry, through praying, through talking to God, through like in community. And you're not going back in the other direction to your unwanted behavior. So I feel like just you writing that the other day, that's just proof that God is at work in you. And I believe He's just going to do something amazing through you. So thank you so much for sharing that.
you're welcome. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. And so in talking about dating, because you just told us that you're, dating now locally, and that's so awesome that God is like kind of like giving you the tap on the shoulder, like, okay, like let's take this step out. So how do you kind of date in while you're also in recovery? Like when is it the right time to
Great
tell
question.
that person
Yeah.
that you have this past or you struggle with this?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is such a beautiful question, and I think there's could be a whole lot of podcasts slash blogs in around this topic alone.
Yeah.
Um, a number that was given to me as I entered counseling in 2020. And so in vulnerability before 2020, from the age of 13 to 22, so just about a decade, I had probably never gone a month without masturbation. And that sounds vulnerable, but it's been processed in a group, and many people know that. That's probably more middle circle, as in if there was levels to my story of vulnerability, maybe that's a middle circle detail.
Mm.
Um, and so entering 2020, our counselor, who is also leading our group, said, "Hey, it would probably be a good mark for you to hit 6 months of sobriety without porn or without masturbation before you pursue dating." And I remember I go, "What? Like 6 months? Come again? Like there ain't nobody dating in the U.S. if 6 months is the expectation." Of course, that's with my distorted lens and my broken sexuality in the past. And there are people who are going much more than 6 months and dating from a healthy place. But I was just like, I'm like, if that was the reality, there'd be nobody getting married. And so for me, like it felt like a healthy challenge. And there's also some research that talks about 90 days, this idea of the brain resetting in and around 90 days without this overstimulus of masturbation and dopamine. And so those were kind of some of the goals I started charting after, pursuing 90 days, hitting 90 days, getting to 6 months. What does it look like at 6 months? Uh, so those are just maybe some arbitrary numbers to think through. If you're in the midst of recovery yourself, or even in the midst of addiction, saying, could I pursue 90 days? And not from a white knuckling behavior management, just going, could I really do that? Jesus, what would it look like for us to do that together? So, second, just regarding how do you share that and when, if you ask anybody within the office, they would say, oh, John's a classic oversharer, as in he's going to overshare. He's going to share his whole story, right away, right out the gate. And the reality is, because I work at Pure Desire, just about anybody in the world can know that pornography was a part of my past. That seems pretty obvious. It's on my LinkedIn banner. You can break free from porn, aka I've broken free from porn.
Really? It's on your LinkedIn
It's on my
banner?
LinkedIn banner. So just about anybody in the world, there's like free advertising that basically says John Begeman was a former porn addict. And so I don't think that's hidden from many
Mm.
people. But that doesn't mean that she has to know my top 10 pain moments, or she has to know my top 4 sexual secrets, or she has to know everything that's shaped me. And even within the last dating experience that I had, one of the questions I was asking one of our counselors here at Pure Desire is, how do I share vulnerably and not overshare?
Yeah.
There is a difference. And I've struggled to do that. And it was on the first date. This was just so profound to me. We were having dinner, and I said, hey, what was food like growing up for you? Like, did your mom or your dad cook? Did you eat out? Because, of course, we're grabbing food. And she simply paused. And I'm like, wait, like, did I say the wrong thing? Like, why is there like a delay? And then she calmly replied, my parents got divorced when I was 5. It's a really big part of my story. We don't have to talk about all of that tonight, but I need you to know that context because it shapes the way in which I answer. And I'm like, she just did it. I'm like, I've never known how to do it, but you just did it. Like you named something honestly, but you didn't have to unpack the whole story. And then you jumped right back in. I'm like, what just happened? It was beautiful. So here I
Yeah.
was learning something that one of my coworkers, Rodney, likes to say is, here we grow again. Instead of go, here we grow again. And there I was growing again over dinner, learning from somebody else, saying, wow, I want to do that. And so there are, of course, moments as I talk about what I get to do and maybe, glimpse my past of exposure or,
Yeah.
struggling throughout high school and the process of recovery, and not having to detail all of it, but giving her an overview that she's aware, maybe not intimately, but she's aware. Because I think there's kindness
Yeah.
to walk into the waters of building a relationship that then might become romantic. And
Yeah.
it'd be really weird just to get completely, I'm going to use the word naked, but spiritually, to take off all of your clothes spiritually and say, this is who I am, in the same way that it'd be pretty weird to do that physically on your first date. And so it's going, hey, if we're wearing clothes like spiritually, how do we take them off slowly in appropriate, God honoring ways, emotionally, spiritually, and physically? And so it's maybe simpler to think about physical boundaries, but sometimes spiritual and emotional boundaries are harder to think through. And Lauren, this actually really breaks my heart. In that conversation, or in a later conversation, she would go on to say, John, Christian guys have been really good at the physical and the spiritual elements of intimacy, but have had basically no emotional intimacy or awareness. And I'm like, A, that breaks my heart. B, the last 3.5 years of doing group and recovery, talking through the FASTER scale has brought a lot of emotional awareness that I'm so grateful for. But what broke my heart in that moment, Lauren, was what I heard was, there's a lot of spirituality that leads to physicality and not like actual real sharing of emotions.
Mm.
And that made me so furious. And I understand that I'm not a single woman in the church, but my heart breaks for the single women in the church who are being spiritually manipulated slash abused, which then leads to physicality. And then all of a sudden they're thinking that I'm lesser than because I've been taken advantage to a level or to a degree that I would have never consented to. But it was spiritual and we were praying together and we were doing these things. And I think there's a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing within the church regarding good Christian guys. And so something I found myself in the dating process saying, Lauren, and I really hope that whether that's you or other gals who are listening, like I hope this is your experience. I've looked at a couple girls and just said, I want you to know that I'm not here to take from you.
Mm.
Like I'm not hiding anything underneath this table right now. I'm not hoping to kiss you on the end of this date. And I'm not hoping to like hug you across the console. I'm not hoping to do anything weird. Like I just want you to know that you're safe and you can hold me to that. And there are people outside of this room that are holding me to that in honesty and transparency. So please just know that I'm not here to take from you. Like in the right timing, in the appropriate ways, I'm here to give because I think that's what love does.
Yeah.
Giving and receiving, not taking. And my heart breaks for the Christian women who've been taken from in the dating experience. I just don't think it's of God, and I don't think it's honoring or kind at all.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for touching on that because I feel like that doesn't get talked a lot about in the church. In one of my groups a few weeks ago, my leader brought up the topic of objectification theory. Have you heard of that?
I've not.
So I hope I don't
Teach
butcher it.
me, please.
Yeah, I hope I don't butcher it. But basically, it's kind of built around this idea that women in our culture and society, women are only valued for their body and what they could give a guy. And then most men, I don't want to say all men because I don't want to generalize them, but most men find their value in what they do or what they have or their money. And
Sure.
so at the foundation of it, it's kind of like the sexual economy that's going on, where if a guy and a gal go on a date, and a guy has a really great paying job, a lot of money or whatever, then that kind of attracts like that kind of girl. And the guy might think that, okay, because I'm giving this my power, my authority, using my resources with her or for her, then I should be able to kind of get something back. So it's on both sides, not just the guy's side. There's this objectification that's going on that is so present in pornography. It's like you just kind of can't escape it. And so there is a rewiring that has to take place, not just for yourself, but also in how you date. And so I'm glad that you kind of called that out, not just in society, but also in the church, because one of the other things that we talked about this got me so upset, but it's how I feel because I'm also like you. I've never been in a relationship before. I would kind of be in that second category you talked about of like waiting. And so I feel like part of that is because specifically in the church, women, I feel like get blasted more with the purity talk of like, you need to save yourself for marriage. This is going to be a great gift for your husband. But then the men, most of the men are not getting that same talk. So the men are just into pornography, sleeping around, having sex, even inside and outside of the church. So then you have all these women that are in the church and they are just kind of like, I don't want to say sitting there, but they're kind of just there waiting. I guess kind of similar to me, or they feel like they have to lower their standards because they don't have patience anymore because they're waiting on all these guys to kind of, figure it out. And then maybe one day they marry someone that is within that same church, but then the guy kind of comes back and he has sexual brokenness, emotionally unavailable, not self-aware at all. And so even though the culture, the Christian culture is pushing marriage, you kind of start out the marriage with these two broken people. So
Absolutely. And what you're describing, Lauren, so in 2016, the Barna Group and Joshua Down Ministry partnered together to create the Porn Phenomena, which was a research about the church and pornography and the impact and the social consequences. And one of the experts in that book described what you're referring to as the pornographic double bind that many women in the church find themselves in because they're dating man number one who happens to be a porn addict. And they're like, oh, you really need help. And I don't want to stay here through that. Like, you need to go do that on your own. This is about you and Jesus, which is true. But she then dates man number two, who's also struggling with porn. And now she finds herself in this double bind of, I already said no to one good guy. And if I say no to this guy, the likelihood that the next guy is struggling is probably very high. So at what point do I just give in and do I settle for someone who's struggling with pornography? Because otherwise, I'm not going to end up married and I'm not going to get to live the life that God's called me to, whatever that is. And again, I'm not trying to idolize marriage, but it's a good desire. And in that good desire, women find themselves in a double bind within the church. And again, that makes me want to run through a brick wall. Like, Lauren, I say this sometimes, and this might sound weird, and maybe I need to rephrase it, but I'm like, man, I'm fighting for you. Like, the groups that I lead, like the amount of young adult men, like in the last 3 years that I've gotten to walk alongside, many of them unmarried, like, I'm fighting for marriages that haven't begun yet, knowing that if you can get hope in your mid-20s or your young 20s, that you won't end up on our doorstep in your mid-30s, like in crisis with 2 kids. Like, go get, like, please get help. Like, please get help. Like, this could be the greatest. This was the tagline in 2021 as I was kicking off groups with guys from Ohio and Florida and Texas, saying this could be the greatest gift you could give your future wife. Your sexual health instead of sexual pain, that you would bless her instead of blowing her up, and that you would bless generations to come. And all of a sudden guys are like, I'm in. Like, I'm in. Because so many men in the church, Lauren, are drowning in shame. One of the thoughts regarding discipleship and men within the church, they're like, where's all the men? Why are they all passive? I'm like, because they're drowning in shame at the bottom of the ocean. And they are tethered. And the reality is, none of them, I shouldn't say none, many of them are not coming up for air to serve in your church, to be present, to be emotionally available, to be with others, because they're drowning in shame. Do you want an effective men's discipleship within your church? Set your men free from sexual sin. Because the enemy is strangling them in silence and shame. The shame's tough enough. The silence is worse. So say something. Do something. Discipleship? Let's talk about sexual discipleship. The way of being free from sin, that's the negative aspect of freedom, which is a good thing. Negatively away from something, and the positive aspect for something. Set your men free from sin, that they might have freedom for all the things God has called them to be. Not just a husband. Whatever the gifting, skills, passions, and abilities God has made them to be, set them free so they can go set the world on fire. Otherwise, right now they're drowning in shame at the bottom of the ocean. And again, Lauren, my heart even grieves as I say this, because I'm speaking as if it's a man's problem, and it's not. Because the women are also drowning in shame. Not as many, but they are. And this is a people problem. The people of God, the church, Christ's body, is drowning in shame. And we're living again amidst a sexual torrent unlike ever before. Like, we've been washed. So who will? Who will rise up from shame, from silence? Not only they themselves, but I love it. When people find freedom, hope, and healing, they become like the Harriet Tubman who says, my freedom isn't just for me. What if I devoted the rest of my life to go get people out of freedom? And this Underground Railroad, I've been getting to read some of her story. It's profound. This Underground Railroad might cost you your life, but in the end, it might lead to life unlike you've ever known before. So who will rise up to be the Harriet Tubmans of our generation, saying, I won't let people live in slavery any longer? And again, I know there's a whole lot of cultural context there, and I don't mean to make light of the slavery that persisted in the South, but the reality is I think we're living in an analogy way in a similar time period. Not the same, not even close, but spiritually in a similar time period. So let's light the torch of freedom and start running with it.
Wow, that is so awesome. I want to end on that note. That was so great. I definitely have to have you back. We could go on for hours probably, just going back and forth and talking about this. But one more thing, I want you to speak to the single men and the single women. What is one thing that you would share with each of those, like, 2 groups? What is like a little nugget or something that
Mhm.
and that you would want them to know if they maybe they haven't started that recovery journey and
Yeah.
this might be their first time ever that they're hearing about recovery and that there's groups at Pure Desire and so many other different organizations. What is one thing that you would tell single men and single women?
Porn is not your problem. It is your poor solution to the pain you've been running from. That's it.
Wow.
Maybe a second line. You have been hurt in relationships, and it is only in the context of relationships with God and others that you will be healed. Porn's not your problem. And though you've been hurt in relationships, it is the very context in which God will heal you.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you so much, John, for being here today. We'll definitely have to have you back. And I just wish you all the best with what you're doing at Pure Desire with leading the groups of young men. Thank you so much for all of you do. And we're so glad to have you on today.
Thanks, Lauren. It's been a privilege.